So first they used to log in with names which are not familiar as Indian surnames. One of them emailed me.
Okay.
Hmm.
So, but this is open for all, or it's only for BOA? How is it?
So it's open for all. Initially we started with only BOA.
Okay.
Because we were doing it without any, and we are still doing it without any IT help.
Right.
No pharma help, nothing.
Right.
So we wanted to be just see how it works, and so now that we are comfortable, then we have started circulating it everywhere.
But there's no member limit. I mean, how many you can log in?
So my
500?
subscription has 500 and unlimited
time.
Number of hours.
And how much do you pay for that subscription?
1200.
5,200
for a year.
No, for a month.
Oh,
there's a 1200 package also. That's different.
That's probably host functions are lesser.
Okay.
Like you cannot manage the waiting room and all.
Okay.
So this is more secure. This is more safer.
Right.
Robert sir, should we start or wait for 1 or 2 minutes more? Because there are few people who are logging in.
How many people have logged in?
Already 65 people have logged in, but there are, I think, 10 or 15 in waiting room.
Wait for a minute.
Yeah, we'll wait 5 minutes, no problem.
तुम्ही तू फॉरवर्ड केलं सगळीकडे?
हाँ सर, फॉरवर्ड केलं.
I think we can start now.
Okay.
Sumit, you would like to give the introduction?
I think it's
Sure. So, welcome everybody for the second phase of BOA PG sessions. The topic for today is a very relevant topic for the consultants as well as PGs. Especially, this would definitely be a spotter in your table viva. So, we have with us one of the fittest retina surgeons, Dr. Sharang Vartikar, with us to make this topic very lucid for all of you. And we have one of the most senior doctors in Bombay, Dr. Donald Lugo sir, to moderate it. Whatever your questions are there, please put it in the chat box. We will try to cover it as much as possible. And I'm admitting everybody in the lecture, but if you have not named yourself as Dr. XYZ, then try to rename yourself, because that is good for the safety of everybody who is logging in. So without much ado, I would request Sharang to start sharing his screen and begin the discussion. Any points, Logo sir, you want to add?
No, I think once we start the lecture, then all the questions will start coming in. So that will cover everything that the PGs would like to hear.
So thank you, Swapnesh, for giving me this opportunity. I'd like to welcome everyone. And it's a vast topic, no doubt. And I'll try and brief you about the basics of OCT and then continue to describe certain retinal lesions and how the OCT appears in this, right? Since it's not possible to cover all retinal diseases, I'm trying to give you a basic approach as to how to read an OCT scan, and then you can apply it to any disease. So we all know that an OCT is a cross-sectional imaging of the retinal tissue using light waves. It's non-invasive, non-contact, which is its major advantage. Provides high resolution, reproducible, and reliable, findings. It's almost like an in vivo optical biopsy. Now, just to see what it started off with, this is how the OCT initial images were, and this is like the retina, and you can try to make out anything that you can out of it. We slowly improved on that, and in the past 2 decades, we have gone, major progress has been made. This was the Stratus OCT, and now we are practically everyone's using the spectral domain OCT, and of course the SwepSource OCT, which some of us have, the benefit of being able to use. And the newer OCTs that have come up now is the OCT angiography. Then you have intraoperative OCTs. You also have ultra wide field OCTs. And then of course, adaptive optics, which is probably the most, highest resolution that you can get out of an OCT. Because of the time constraints, we won't be dealing with all these in details. So let us start with the basics, and it doesn't get any more basic than the ABCDE of OCTs. Right? So let us see what all these scans actually mean. Now, A scan we are familiar with. What it does is whatever light is being reflected from the ocular tissues is represented in an amplitude form. So you get this graph basically, which is showing higher reflectivity and lower reflectivity. Right? Now, the same thing can be represented in a brightness form where the troughs are dark and the crests or higher reflectivity shown in white. And everything in between has been given a shade of gray. Now, similarly, every shade can be given a certain color, and the same scan can be made a little more colorful. So when you see an OCT scan, what you are actually seeing an A scan is a single line on this entire OCT scan. So any single line is a single A scan. Now, what is a B scan? It's nothing but multiple A scans put together next to each other to form the entire picture of the scan. So what actually is also known as a B scan of the OCT, not to be confused with the ultrasonographic B scan. This is a B scan of the OCT. And then a 3D scan is nothing but multiple such B scans put next to each other in order to give a 3-dimensional image, which is a 3D scan, right? Which looks something like this. And then you have a C scan, which is a cross-section scan, also known as the AFAS image, where you actually take a cross-section of the 3D scan and you look at it end-on, right? So you look at it from the top and you get a C scan. So it is like you're directly looking with an IO into the eye and how the images that you will get based on that. And you can choose the level at which you want to look at the images. Now, the newest kid on the block is the OCT angiography. I'll just tell the principle of that. You take a normal 3D scan and you take another 3D scan of the same area, but just with a little bit of time gap, right? And you digitally subtract the two images. Now, the only thing that would have changed between these two scans is anything that has moved, because it's the same area, right? So whatever is not moving will, can be eliminated. And so what is left is just the blood vessels, because blood is the only thing that is moving in there. And you take a C scan of this, like an AFAS image of that, and this is what you get. So you get the vasculature image. So this is OCT angiography. If you look at the principles of OCT, I won't be going into the depths of that. I'll try and restrict this talk to 40 minutes. You have a time domain OCT and you have a Fourier domain OCT. And Fourier domain can be further differentiated into a spectral domain and a SwepSource. So just looking at the basics of the, how it works, there's a light source, which is thrown into a beam splitter that splits the light into two parts. One part goes to a mirror, which could be stationary or it could be, moving mirror. And part of it goes into the ocular structure. From both places, it is reflected back and it is taken to the detector. Now, this is the analyzer which analyzes the rays which are coming from the ocular tissue and from the mirror and gives us the final picture. So if you look at a time domain OCT, it looks a bit complicated, but you understand that there is a light source, which is a laser source, a superluminescent diode laser, goes through the beam splitter, part goes to a moving reference mirror, and the other part goes into the ocular tissue. The difference in the spectral domain is that instead of this moving mirror, there's a stationary reference mirror. So there is no time lag involved in the mirror moving. So since there are no mechanical parts there, the speed increases drastically. And in a swept source, the change is done in the laser source itself. The source is of a higher wavelength. So if you look at it in a tabular format, the acquisition protocol for the three is different. And because of the difference in the mirror, the spectral domain has a much higher A-scan capture speed compared to a time domain. And the resolution also improves. The swept source has a little further higher speed, but what is more important is because of this wavelength, it allows a deeper penetration, and it is better in cataracts and even in presence of vitreous hemorrhage. And when the scan is being done, because it is in the invisible spectrum, it does not distract the patients. And the spectral domain also has an enhanced depth imaging scan, which can provide us the depth of the choroid, which is essential for diagnosing something like a pachychoroid, which is a new entity which is now found to have a significant etiology in various conditions. But if you really want to study the choroid, nothing beats the swept source OCT, where you can get the entire choroid and the scleral details as well, right? Now, why is speed so important? Because there's something called as averaging of scans. Now, added speed provides us an option to do multiple scans at the same location. So when you do that, you overlap them and signals are enhanced and all the noise which is there is eliminated. How does that help us? Now, this is a single scan. Okay, this is a single scan. This is how it looks. But if you add more scans, now this is 4 scans which have been averaged out. So you can see the clarity has improved. If you go further, 16, you get more and more clarity of the layers of the retina and of the choroid as well. So this is how averaging helps. The other thing we can do is we can do eye motion tracking. So for this, an image of the fundus, either infrared or color fundus, is registered prior to scanning, and subsequently all scans are aligned to the image. If we find that the image is shifting, then the scanning stops and then restarts from the original point. So it provides us more accuracy, but it takes a much longer time to complete. Another software feature we should be aware of is auto segmentation. Now, every machine has an inbuilt algorithm for this. It identifies the ILM and it identifies the RP layer. And based on that, it calculates the macular thickness or the retinal thickness, which is very reliable in a normal retina, but can definitely go wrong in advanced diseases. We can also touch upon the various color codes that are used. The standard one is this grayscale on top, which is shown. And there is an inverse grayscale, which sometimes is helpful in diagnosing certain conditions. And the other one is the color thing, which is many times we see on printouts. Not an ideal thing because it increases the contrast significantly. So you can see the layers which are well differentiated here are not as well differentiated here. But if the clarity of the image is poor, then this color coding will definitely help because it will improve the contrast. Before we start anything, we should understand what is normal, right? So let us see what is a normal scan. And I'm going to take a little bit of time here because unless you understand this well, you'll be hard pressed to make any diagnosis on the OCT. So we all know the 10 layers of the retina, and I'm not going to go into that. But if you see a scan, how do you approach that? So the first thing that you should look out for is this bunch of hyperreflective lines, right? It's very difficult to miss this. So these are there. Now, if you see just inside that, inner to that, you will see this very thin line of hyperreflectivity. This is the external limiting membrane. Now, inner to that, you have a hypo, hyper, hypo, hyper, hypo, and hyper zones. So these are alternating bands, and every band you can make out. It's an outer nuclear layer, the outer plexiform layer, inner nuclear layer, inner plexiform layer, the ganglion cell layer, and finally the nerve fiber layer. So these things are pretty standard, easy to understand. On the other side of these hyperreflective lines are the choriocapillaries and the choroidal vessels, right? So these things you should be able to remember quite easily. The trick is remembering this, right? This area is very critical because here you have this external limiting membrane, which I just described. And outside to that, you have these two hyporeflective bands, and you have these 3 hyperreflective bands, right? So these are the crux of the OCT. Now, if you see this, this is how the cone is situated in the macula, okay? And this is the RP and basement. Now, we have seen that the cone can be made up of an inner segment and an outer segment. This is where the external limiting membrane lies, and inner to that is the outer nuclear layer, outer plexiform layer, and so on and so forth. I am not going to those details. Outside is the choroidal vessels. In between, we have seen there are 2 hypo and 3 hyper bands. Now, let us see what they correspond to. Now, the inner hypo and hyper correspond to the inner segment of the photoreceptors. So there is a myoid zone with the Golgi complex and the ellipsoid complex, and then you have the ellipsoid zone, which is outside. Now, this ellipsoid zone is very critical because the visual prognosis depends on that. This is where the mitochondria are situated. It's a part of the inner segment, the outer part of the inner segment. And then you have a photoreceptor outer segment, which is basically membranes and tubules, which are densely packed. And as a result, it appears hyporeflective. And then you have this interdigitation zone, also known as the Verhoef's membrane, where the cones interdigitate with the microvilli of the RPE. And finally, you have the RPE basement membrane complex. So that is the last hyperreflective band. So if you see this, this is how anatomically it is situated. And whenever you see an OCT scan, this is what you have to understand. The ellipsoid zone, also previously known as the ISOS junction, and is the, for visual prognosis, this is quite important. Right? Now let us come to how to read an OCT. Golden rule is best to check on the machine rather than comment on a printout. But of course, we may not have a luxury for that every time, or in the exams also, you may not have a machine to check out everything. You may have to do with a printout. Whatever it is, you have to have a proper approach to the interpretation. And I've made a small mnemonic here, which should help you. And that mnemonic is approach itself. So what all it means, you have to look at the area that is scanned, the placement of the scan, the protocol used, reliability of the scan, and overall glance through all the scans if it's possible, amplitude of thickness, the quantitative data. And then you look at the more important things, which is the contour and contiguity of layers and the hyper and hyporeflective abnormal lesions. So we'll approach this lecture based on these points. Now, if you look at this OCT scan, it pretty much looks to be normal, nothing significant here. You may say everything is fine with the patient, but that's because we are looking at a scan which is passing through the fovea, but not through the lesion of interest. So this is where the area scan becomes important. Unless you scan the right area, the OCT has no meaning. On the other hand, if you look at this picture and you see there's a large elevation here and you may say it's at the fovea and probably the vision will be very poor. But this is the same patient and now the scan has been done over the lesion. The fovea is somewhere else altogether, right? So you should also know where is the placement of scan in relation to the fovea. So that is also important. Then we come to the protocol used. Now, every machine will have different protocols and there will be multiple protocols made there. So most of them are not so often used, but they'll be there just for the sake of it. But let us understand what these protocols do, and then we will know which protocol to select. So what's an ideal scan protocol? Well, ideally, it should have the highest number of scans at the best possible resolution with maximum possible averaging and with a continuous eye movement tracking. If you do that, you will have a very good quality OCT image. But what it has to be done, all this has to be done before the patient actually blinks or loses focus, because otherwise it has no meaning. Now, all these things take extra time. So you can't have the best of everything. So you have to make a compromise, quantity versus quality. If you want more area to be scanned, you'll have to compromise on the quality. If you want the best quality, then you'll have to do with a lesser area scanned. So based on this, you have a certain protocols. Now this is a macular map or a 3D macula or whatever different machines like to call it, but it's basically maximum number of scans over the entire macular area. So it provides reliable thickness values and provides a 3D image construction if you desire, but individual scans have poor resolution. On the other hand, you have a single line scan. So multiple scans are done in the same area and they are overlapped. So this allows for better averaging and provides highest quality images. But if you do it off center, you can completely miss the lesion. And obviously the quantitative data is very less. Radial scans provide a compromise between the two, kind of cover large area, multiple scans are done, not as many as a macular map, but still reasonably good enough. So reasonable quantitative data with a reasonably good image quality. And it can give a 3D surface view if you desire. So this is an example of a scan which is done, and this is an example of the 3D image construction which is done. This is just the surface construction which is provided. This is the actual 3D image which can be done with a map, and certain cases like this is a vitreomacular traction, pre-op and a post-op picture, which can actually depict and show what was the dynamics before and how it is now. Not always used practically, but sometimes it can be helpful. So like I said, the resolution changes. This is a macular map, this is a radial scan, and the best resolution you will get from a line scan, obviously, because more averaging is possible. Next, we move on to the reliability of the scan. Now, what does that mean? You have to look out for any artifacts which are induced, right? So if you look at this scan, what is wrong here? Well, the scan looks pretty much normal, but still this data here is showing that there is a lot of disturbance here, something wrong, and it is not in the normal range. Why it should be so? Because if you look at through all the scans that have been taken, now you will see a small dip in the scan. You saw that? There was that area, there was no data which was captured. Why did that happen? Because the patient blinked. So when the patient blinks, you can see a black patch in the infrared image, which is simultaneously being captured. And that shows that data for this much area is missing. So obviously, the software will interpret something else on its own, and those values will be incorrect. So you cannot accept such scans. This is a patient-related artifact. The other is eye movement. So this is how a normal, if you do a 3D scan of the nerve, I'm giving a nerve example because it's easier to see. And this is what happens if there are eye movements. So you can see the eye has moved considerably, and obviously you cannot accept such a scan. Then what is wrong here? This is a pretty good scan. There is no disturbance seen here, but something is not right. If you look at this scan, you will see that it is off center. Now, this is where the actual center is. This is where the fovea is, and the entire scan is shifted on one side. So this is an operator related problem because operator did not check for the scan. And so what happens is the values which are given will obviously be incorrect. This is not the foveal thickness. On subsequent visit, if we do a scan which is centered at that time, then obviously the values will not match. And then what is this? This seems to have a complete tissue loss here. But what actually happened is this is a myopic eye. And in myopes, you will get these slants, oblique scans at certain angles. And then what happens is it goes beyond the depth of the scan. And that is where you get this reflected light. So whatever is anterior to this gets reflected back and is shown in the image. And as a result, this much area, there is no data which is obtained. And that is where you get these blanks. So this is incomplete images. Also, you can notice that this area is well focused, but this is poorly focused. So this is something we need to understand. The focus has to be adjusted right in the center so that everything is equally focused and should not be this way. Now, what is wrong with this image? There is a scan, this is the fundus photo, but you see this 3D construction here. You see these pits here. There's nothing to suggest that there is some thinning or anything happening here. So what has gone wrong here? It's a software related problem. The segmentation has failed. So the RPE has been incorrectly diagnosed by the software. And as a result, it is showing that there is some thinning in this area, but actually there is none. So fortunately, you can easily rectify it. Easier for radial scans because lesser number of scans. When the macular map will have multiple scans, you may not be able to do it. And once you correct the RPE, from this you get this image. And this is how is it practical? Because if this happens right in the center of a fovea, and then the values are incorrectly shown. And when you correct it, you get the actual values. So this is important when you have to take treatment decisions or you have to see whether your previous treatment has worked or not. Next, we move on to pseudo hypo and pseudo hyperreflectivity. Now, this is a general scan. Everywhere you can see that there is a hyporeflectivity. And here, partly this area is hyporeflective. Here, the reflectivity is normal. Now, this happens because there is some media opacity like cataract, astroids, or in undilated pupil. In an undilated pupil, you tend to, take it on the side or something, or even if there's a central cataract, you try to adjust it in such a way that the scan is a little eccentric. And that is when you get a partially good scan and partially you get low reflectivity. And then what has happened here? This is completely missing here. The reason is because this is known as shadowing. There are anterior hyperreflective lesions which completely block the light from going behind. And that is why you have this pseudo hyporeflectivity. The other thing that you have to understand is how the light is reaching the retina that will determine the reflectivity. Now you see here, this is normal reflectivity. This area, there is reflectivity is completely lost of the RP. And here suddenly it has become hyper reflective. Now why is this so? Because the amount of tissue the light has to pass through in this area is normal. In this area, it has to pass through extra tissue. And that's why lesser light reflects from here. And here there is practically no tissue here. So the reflectivity is suddenly increased, right? So anterior atrophic tissue will give rise to hyperreflectivity. Extra tissue will give rise to pseudo hyperreflectivity. This is the same patient post-operatively. The other thing is atrophic tissue can also be because of macular degeneration. And that is when the choroidal areas and even the scleral areas will be seen more hyperreflective. The next point is overall glance through all the scans. Why is this important? Because a single scan will not tell you the entire picture. If you look at this, this is not just an elevation here. You can see a small PED which came up during those scans. So such lesions you can miss if you just look at single scans. And why is this important? Because many times, as this is a case of CSCR, you can see that if you correlate it with the fundus picture, you can actually get the point of leakage. And this is seen excellently on the FFA. You do the FFA and you can correlate it with this point and you see this is where the fluid is coming from. The other important thing is if you see the scan, if you look at it, it seems to be fine. There are some cystoid changes, nothing significant. But if you just shift it slightly and take an adjacent scan, you will see that actually there's a full thickness macular hole there. So the treatment can drastically change from just giving NSAIDs to actually doing a surgery. This is the post-operative picture. Next, we move on to an amplitude. Now, what is this? The ETDRS grid is used for analyzing the thickness. And what is the most important factor here is the central retinal thickness. Now, this is a reproducible measurement having normative database. So this is commonly used. What you have to understand is this is how it gives, and anything outside the normal will be shown in different colors. But segmentation errors, like we previously saw, can confound the interpretation. Also, different machines have different algorithms, so it's not, you can directly correlate the two from two different machines. Radials can also provide some values. They are pretty, accurate. You can see here, but the colors are not based on normative data. They are just pseudo colors given on whatever is the thickness. So anything above normal will be given as yellow, orange, red, white, and everything below that will be blue and black. Next, we move on to contour and contiguity of layers. Let's see the contour first. So you can have a generalized change or a localized change in the contour. Generalized may be concavity, convexity, and localized we can further look into outer retinal and inner retinal. So concavity will be seen typically in cases of eye myopes. Convexity could be seen in choroidal lesions like choroiditis. Undulations is an irregularity very typical of VKH. In fact, straightening of this undulations is a good prognostic factor, suggests that the treatment is working effectively. Now, if you look at local elevations in the contour, you have an outer retinal problems like a pigment epithelial detachment. You could have a choroidal neovascular membrane. In the inner retina, you could have a disturbance in the contour because of an epiretinal membrane. There could be a cystoid macular edema, vitromacular traction, or you could have a combination of various things. Right? Next, you see that the inner retina also reflects the vascular status of the retina, right? Because the vessels of the retina come and supply the inner part. So any atrophy, as you can see here, compare it with this side. This atrophy is suggestive of chronic ischemia. If it is thickened and hyperreflective, you are looking at arterial occlusions as seen here. And if it is thickened and hyporeflective, then you're probably looking at venous occlusions, right? Next, we move on to contiguity of layers. Now, the contiguity can be broken in the outer retinal layers, as you can see here, because of scars, focal macular scars, which can be seen, or it could be phototoxicity, where the photoreceptors are damaged. Again, note that this is a very small lesion. So any little bit, you do an eccentric scan, even slightly, you are likely to miss the lesion and you will never be able to know why the vision is not improving. So it's very important that you sit in front of the machine and see it yourself rather than just commenting on any printout which the patient brings. Again, CNVM will also show a lot of disturbance in the contiguity of layers. Macular dystrophies and drug toxicities will also give a similar picture. You can see the outer retina, it is completely damaged in this area. If you look at the inner retina, you could have cystoid spaces which will disturb the contiguity. You could have lamellar holes, or you could have something like a parafoveal telangiectasia where you have atrophy of the tissues. And then of course, macular schisis can also present like this. A toxoplasma scar will have an interesting picture if you go through the punched out lesion, or even a coloboma can have this change in the contour and contiguity of the retina. Next, we look at the hyper and hyporeflective abnormal lesions, right? Let's start with the hyperreflective lesions. Now, what is this? Multiple lesions seen here. This is nothing but asteroids. So asteroid hallosis can present like this. You should note that what is happening here is not that the asteroids are going right into the choroid. It is the same reflected images that you're seeing here. Like we saw in that myopic patient, whatever is way anterior is reflected back and you may see it posteriorly. So that is something you have to be aware of. If something is not as prominent, it could be something like vitritis or even a vitreous hemorrhage, which can present with hyperreflective lesions. In the inner retina, you can have an epiretinal membrane, which will be hyperreflective. You could have exudates or hemorrhages, both will appear similar and they will be intraretinal. You could have pigmentation or calcification. Outer retina will show drusens as hyperreflective lesions. It could be fibrosis, scarring, choroidal neovascular membranes, or deposits of subretinal fibrin or precipitates. Then there could be tissue atrophy. These are now we have come to the hyporeflective abnormal lesions. Generally because of atrophy of the tissue, or it could be presence of fluid. Now this is something we'll take up a little more in detail in a short while. So that kind of covers the entire approach that we have had. And just to go through the way that we have analyzed this area scan so that we understand the lesion is accurately captured, placement of the scan in relation to the fovea, protocol used, whether you have obtained enough quantitative and qualitative data, reliability of the scan so that you exclude all artifacts, overall glance through all the scans, ensure that nothing is missed, look at the amplitude of thickness, make that quantitative analysis, and then you move on to the contour and contiguity of layers and hyperreflective and hyporeflective abnormal lesions. So this is something that we need to develop over the time, and the subsequent scans that I'm going to show of different conditions will focus more on this. But before we go there, if in the exams, since it's a lecture for PG students, you're given a scan like this and you're asked to describe it. Well, let us try and attempt describing a couple of scans so that we understand what the approach means. So first thing, which is outside this mnemonic, is the clinical data. So let's not forget that, right? Male, female, age, all these things are also important. Whatever additional systemic history has been provided, complaints have been provided, these will obviously help in making a diagnosis. But if nothing else is provided, you move on to see what area has been scanned, either on a fundus image or an infrared image. Ensure that the lesion is captured. Ensure that the placement is proper, going through the fovea, because that is the most important part that we are interested in most of the times. Check for the reliability. Now that is an image quality. Usually there's an index and the scan provides. Different machines will have different methods, but it will tell you how good or bad the quality of the image is. Look at, well, you can't look at the overall scans, but sometimes you may get multiple scan images given. So just glance through that, just see everything is fine. There are no scans missing or anything. So you know what it is. Then you move on to the amplitude and see the values that are seen here. You can make out that there's some thickening which is seen here. So that helps. And then finally, you look at the scan, you'll see that the reflectivity here has increased. Loss of inner retinal layers is seen. So this is like an ischemic episode, which can also correlate with this image if that is available. And this is probably a branch retinal artery occlusion. So that is how you can approach a scan. The protocol, the protocol is mentioned here. It's a radial protocol, 6 mm scans. 12 scans have been done, each with 1024 A scans. So that tells you a lot about the resolution of the scan. Another example we'll take, the difference here from the previous one is that the reliability is very poor, it's shown in red, and the quality is poor. And the reason for that is because there are a lot of echoes in the vitreous, so the media is hazy. And if you look at the fundus picture, you will know it is because of vitreous hemorrhage, which is seen here. So this graph which is shown here is, you just have to ignore it, because with such poor quality, the segmentation will have a lot of errors, and you cannot actually take these values as they are given, right? So this is how you approach a scan. And to go into the more details of a particular O scan, the rest of the approach is, the other things of the scan which are seen. But if you look at the contour and contiguity, this is how you approach it. You see there is a outer retinal elevation seen here, and you can make out that there is fluid here, and it is inside the RPE basement membrane complex. So this is a subsensory fluid here. You see there is some loss of contiguity here, disruptions are seen here. The reason being there is shadowing because of these hard exudates and hemorrhages which are present here. What else you can make out? There's a hyperreflectivity here, which is the extra ERM which is seen here. And then you have a fluid here, which is increased thickness compared to the other side. So you can come to a diagnosis, intraretinal edema, which is seen here, subfoveal subsensory fluid with intraretinal hard exudates and or hemorrhages with early epiretinal membrane. So this is how you can describe a OCT scan. Now let us look at some things in more detail. Let's look at how fluid looks on the OCT. Now these are 3 images which will show looking similar, but the fluid is totally different. The first image you can see here is crystal clear fluid. So this is a serous fluid, that is CSCR. Here you can see there is more turbidity here, so suggests of inflammatory fluid, and that is more likely seen in choroiditis. And here this is clear, but there is a dense hemorrhage which is seen here, so probably a choroidal neovascular membrane. The other thing is the location of fluid. Now this is intraretinal fluid, this is subsensory fluid, right? And then there is sub-PED fluid. Now sub-PED fluid again can be clear, or it could be hyperreflective, as in a drusenoid PED or a fibrovascular PED. To revise this, fluid can be present in different layers. Here you can see an RPE basement membrane, so this is subsensory. Here you see only basement membrane, the RPE is lifted here, so this is sub-RPE fluid, right? Let us see at blood on OCT, how is that going to look, right? This image we saw where you have this, reflectivity in the vitreous, and this is because of vitreous hemorrhage. This is how it will look. This is how a subhyaloid hemorrhage is going to look. This is pre-YAG and this is post-YAG, when the vitreous hemorrhage, the subhyaloid hemorrhage has dispersed into the vitreous. This is a streak of subhyaloid hemorrhage which is left. This is how it will be seen, partial PVD with level of subhyaloid hemorrhage. And this, you can have a combination of subhyaloid hemorrhage along with a large subretinal hemorrhage. You can see the retina over this area, and you can see the retina under this area. So this is how you differentiate from the various hemorrhages. A quick look at diabetic macular edema. There are 5 types which are described. This is a spongiform edema. This is a cystoid edema. There is a subsensory fluid. You could have a taut posterior hyaloid, and you can have a tractional retinal detachment. So these are an OCT based classification. Talking of traction, I'll quickly touch upon the international VMT study classification, because VMT can be beautifully studied on the OCT. They classified it into vitromacular adhesion when there is no change in the foveal contour, and vitromacular traction when there is a disturbance in the foveal surface. And these can be subsequently subclassified as isolated or concurrent. Concurrent when there is an incidental another disease like a CNVM or a diabetic edema, and then you see all these, then it's a concurrent. Isolated when there is no other disease. It could be focal or broad depending on the area of attachment, right? So let us see some examples. So this is a vitromacular adhesion. You can see here, this is how the adhesion will look. And why adhesion and not traction? Because the contour is normal. And if you measure it, you will know that it is more than 1500 microns. So this is a broad VMA, right? And this is a focal VMA because it is small, less than 1500, right? In the earlier classification of macular hole, this used to be known as stage 0 macular hole. Now this is a vitreomacular traction now, because of this we are seeing a change in the retinal contour. Now these are what are known as pseudocysts. So this was the stage 1A as previously described, so impending macular hole or a pseudocyst. Now this is the full thickness macular hole with vitreomacular traction according to the newer classification. But earlier classification was this stage 1B, which is a full thickness with roof. The roof is still intact, not completely separated from the retina, also known as an occult macular hole. When it starts partially separating, the current classification still calls it full thickness macular hole with VMT, but then it goes into the stage 2, which is partially opening, right? Full thickness macular hole, but partial opening is seen here. And then there is a total opening. This becomes stage 3, full thickness macular hole, but the operculum is still seen on the scan, not disappeared. And this becomes full thickness macular hole without VMT, because now there is no longer a traction which is exerted. The other thing the newer classification gives is classifying macular hole into small, medium, and large. So anything less than 250 is a small macular hole. Between 250 to 400 is a medium macular hole. Now this is stage 4, because now the PVD is not seen. The operculum PVD is, everything is separated. So this is full thickness macular hole with complete PVD. And the large macular hole can be anything more than 400 microns. So this is full thickness macular hole without VMT and a large in size. The other thing on OCT that we know is a hole form factor, where you have the minimum diameter you take, then you take the basal diameter, then you take a right arm length and you take a left arm length. And then you have a formula where left arm length plus right arm length divided by the basal diameter, you get the hole form factor. This is a pre-operative picture, and this is post-operative. Now in such scans also, there are certain signs which suggest that surgery has been done. One is the presence of this ILM, because now many times we do an inverted flap technique and the residual ILM can be seen here. The other thing is what is known as DONFL. Now this is dissociated outer nerve fiber layer. Every time you do an ILM peeling, there is a disturbance here which is seen, typically a month or 2 months down the line, and this is because of the outer nerve fiber layer dissociation. So these are signs on a post-vitrectomy. The other thing worth mentioning is the pseudomacular hole. Now here on clinically you will see something like a macular hole, but actually there is tissue here. It's not completely gone through, and hence this is known as a pseudomacular hole. Right? So that kind of covers everything, and I'll be have some cases which we can see, and I think we have just finished 40 minutes. So Dr. Lobo sir, if you feel there are questions that we want to take, we can do that, or I can move on with the cases. Yeah, you will have to unmute yourself. Okay, maybe I'll continue till sir figures out how to unmute himself. So this is the first case that we can look at. Right. So what do you see here? There's a complete, loss of tissue here. But actually, it's not that. When you have something as gross as this, you have to think of other things. This is nothing but a large vitreous floater, which is completely blocking the light from reaching here. So this is basically a shadowing effect, right? Now, when you look at a scan, you always have, God has given us two eyes. So you can compare right eye and a left eye. But when you're looking at a scan, you can also compare the right half with the left half, right? So if you look at this side and you look at this side, you can easily make out that there is a difference. And when you have such partial, half-sided differences, you should think in terms of things that can affect only half part of the retina, as in branch retinal vein occlusion. Now let us look at this case. This patient came with decreased vision since 2 years, vision of 6/18. If you look at this scan, nothing seems to be wrong, pretty much fine, right? If you look at the 3D construction here, surface construction, you see something is wrong. Here there is thinning, and here this is normal. So you have realized that you have taken a scan to the wrong area. You change the scan, take it vertical scan, and you will see that this area has gone atrophic and this area has normal thickness. So obviously this is a sign of an old ischemia. Now, the same patient, if you refer to a scan which was done 2 years previously, you will see that the patient had come with a BRAO. And that time, this was the scan, right? Increased retinal hyperreflectivity with thickening. That is how it presents. Even that time, if we had taken a horizontal scan, we could have probably missed the lesion. So it's important to look at all the scans and not to jump in with a diagnosis, seeing only 1 or 2 scans. Yeah, Lobo sir, you want to say something?
No, you can go ahead.
Go ahead. Right? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now this is the case of of CSCR, central serous chorioretinopathy. And you can, if you take the right scan, you will be able to make out a disruption in the RP, and probably this is where the leak is happening from. So for this, you need to be in front of the machine and do the scans yourself. So this really helps. Now compare it with this. Now, like I told you before, this is the RP which has gone elevated. So this is different. So don't confuse these two. This is a pigment epithelial detachment, and a large one at that. Of course, it also has some sensory fluid, but this is different. Now, if you do a 3D construction of this, this is how it will look. The center area will not be elevated. That is because the machine calculates it from the RP to the ILM, and that thickness is not much here, right? So this is how you will get the pitching. It will be only shown increased in this area because it will not taking vertically, it will take anterior posterior. And compare it with this with a CSCR where it will be showing this way. So that is the difference which is seen in that. Now, if you look at this, again, subsensory fluid elevation going inferiorly like this, you can see there is a large CSCR here, and it's spontaneously resolved. This is subsensory or subretinal fibrin, which is left behind. So this was a CSCR. Again, a similar picture. Now, the important thing is, what is the difference? You should see the angle. The angle is not as smooth or as less as it was previously. This is a very acute angle. And why is that so? Because this is a retinal detachment. So anytime you don't see the entire extent of the lesion, take an effort to scan that area also. Of course, this will be seen on IO. This is not, this is just for the discussion sake that I'm taking up. You don't need an OCT to diagnose an retinal detachment, but on the basis of retinal OCT alone, do not make a diagnosis, is what I'm trying to say. And this patient was operated and subsequently dealt with. Now, similarly, you can see this elevation similar to what we just saw. You may be tempted in talking in terms of a retinal detachment, but the difference being, look at this area. There's a complete disappearance of the RP. That's because there's a shadowing effect here. And this is the subretinal blood of that same patient that we had seen earlier. That is why the RP is lost. So look at all the layers and then only make some conclusion. What about this? Well, the RP is completely absent here. You're not seeing the RP at all. Why has that happened? Because this is a retinal detachment, long-standing one, because this is a subretinal band here, which is seen, and the RP is somewhere way down below. So start with that. Always have all layers in mind and then make a conclusion. This patient underwent scleral buccal surgery, and this is how we did. The other thing that you should see is, in certain cases, you can have multiple diseases in the same patient. Like this patient has a choroidal neovascular membrane, plus he has developed a macular. So you should look at all things, and all possibilities have to be taken in account. Sometimes you get this, intraretinal lesions which you cannot make out what they are, but then you need to correlate with the fundus image. And if you see where it is correlating, this is a large telangiectatic vessel here, and this is actually the vessel that is seen here. The other things that can look similar are outer retinal tubulations. These are oval hyporeflective spaces, but these are in the outer retina, not in the inner retina as we just saw. And they show signs of, they suggest signs of degeneration and advanced damage. These should not be treated because this do not respond to any anti-VEGFs or any treatment, right? Similarly, you can get some funny lesions like this. Now, this is again, you have to correlate clinically. This is actually this blood vessels, which we are seeing in a cross-sectional area. This is a vitromacular traction, which we can easily see. And that is where you decide that surgery is what is needed. And this is the post-operative picture. Finally, we had seen this scan earlier also of macular schisis and subretinal fluid. But before jumping to conclusion, you should look at the entire extent of the scan and also correlate clinically, because you will see that this has an optic nerve head pit, and that is where the fluid is coming from. And finally, I'll have this one case, which is quite interesting. Now, this patient had come with a decreased vision, and the OCT scan showed this, right? So this is obviously an atrophy which is seen here. But what is it because of? You can see on the 3D scan also, you can see the surface reconstruction shows that there is a damage here, thinning here. Now, interestingly, if you correlate it with the fundus image, you will see beautifully that this area of thinning is correlating nicely with this blood vessel, which is going here. So this is a cilioretinal artery, and this is a cilioretinal artery occlus. Right? So thank you. I hope I have been able to justify the topic where my expectation would be that you'll know how to approach an OCT scan, and then of course individual diseases you can always read up and know more about it. But how to approach a scan and how to describe it, if you can make out that much, I think that would have served the purpose of this scan of this lecture.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sharan. It was very wonderful lecture and especially very nice pictures and the pictorial representation of how to read OCT. We have quite a few questions. Yes, I will be reading it. Lobo sir, or you can discuss and answer for the students. So the first question from Dr. Sagar here is there any value of signal strength for a particular OCT machine to be reliable?
Is there any value
of signal strength for a particular OCT machine to be reliable?
Yeah, so every machine will have a reliability value. It will vary from machine to machine. I have the Topcon machine, and from that 30 is the value which the machine has decided. So anything less than 30, it automatically shows in red, right? So that is automatically shown, and anything more than 30 is shown as green. But different machines will have different, and it will be mentioned there in the machine itself.
Okay, then difference between RAP and CNVM on OCT.
RAP and CNVM
on OCT.
So see, an RAP, if you look at the entire pathogenesis of the whole thing, I wish I had an image of that. But what you can make out is CNVM is going to come from inner to outer to inner side, while an RAP is going to go from inner side. So when the inner the lesion is actually formed, at that time when you're looking at it, it's going to be a little difficult to differentiate the two on an OCT. Better you see it on a angiography. But let me just check if I have an image of that, and I'll just share it with you.
Okay.
Meanwhile, you can ask the next
question. Meanwhile, Lobo sir, there is one more question. Can denser cataract cause artifacts? Up to what grade can we assess fundus? Lobo sir?
Yeah. See, there are a lot of things which can cause artifacts. Cataract is one of the things. And that's why sometimes it's better to dilate a pupil so that we can get around the cataract from a slightly different angle and see the get the OCT in a little better way. Okay. Another thing which causes artifacts is a dry eye. So sometimes we take a picture and we find that we are not getting a good picture, and putting lubricating drops helps a lot on that. And so one should never take an OCT after said putting an anesthetic drop on the eye, because we tend to get a lot of artifacts after putting anesthetic drops. So a lot of artifacts can be caused. We should be aware of them, and the operator should know about it and get the OCT in the best possible way.
Okay. Then again, there is one more question, Dr. Anubhav. To quantify it as a small, medium, large hole, at what level it is measured, and also describe the various terms used for the macular hole.
I think Sharan has.
Yeah, he has covered in this in the presentation.
Because there is an area which is the point which is called the MLD, or the minimum linear diameter. So at that point, we have to measure the macular hole. And it's not the base. The base is called the basal diameter. The base would be much larger. We have to go a little bit above and see the MLD, or the minimum linear diameter, which probably Sharan could show that slide once again. And you have to measure from that point.
Mm-hmm.
Then small, medium, large, and large hole is less than 250, 250 to 400, and larger than 400.
Okay, so then Dr. Ranjan wants to know when do we advise a radial scan? Is it routinely done or is it done for some particular pathology?
No, so radial scan is an optional scan, and that kind of covers both the areas. I mean, it gives a good quantitative and qualitative analysis. So that a single scan can provide enough data for both. You don't necessarily then have to do a macular scan, or you don't have to do a linear scan. Some machines have a raster scan, they don't have a radial scan. So it's all depends on the machine and whatever you want to look at in that particular pathology. Ideal is to do all scans and keep, and then pick what you want to according to your requirements.
Yeah, the radial scan gives a very good resolution because it scans on each line about at least 4 times, at least in the Topcon machine. So you get a much better resolution than a macular cube, where in the cube we just take a single scan of each each line. So the resolution in radial scan is excellent. So sometimes we tend to do the radial scan first, and then if you want to get more information, maybe a 3D image, we can go for a macular scan next. There is a practical issue of the if we take too many scans, the software gets filled up, and it's difficult for the machine to manage. So we try to take a minimum number of scans which is required for our diagnosis.
Then how do you diagnose chloroquine toxicity on OCT?
Yeah, I'll just show you this. Are you seeing this? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So this was the previous question where you have, this is the minimum diameter, right? So this is what you measure when you want to measure the macular hole, right? Anywhere you see all lesions, which is the minimal. So usually it is in the center of the retina somewhere, right? That is how you measure. Yeah, and for toxicity, it will have a, what we call as a saucer-shaped image where the outer retinal layers, fovea will be spared, but on the adjacent side, you will have this. So this is not a typical chloroquine toxicity, but you can see this is how it will happen. And the center fovea can be spared here. So this will be normal, but here and here on the adjacent sides, you will have this problem. So that is how the chloroquine toxicity will look.
That's flying saucer sign.
And can we differentiate between acute and chronic CFTR on OCT?
Presence of subretinal fibrin is one way that you can make out between acute and chronic. But other than that, there are no much differences. You will have this fluid could be turbid when you have this. So, when you are looking at these lesions, if you have certain turbidity, even a chronic CSR can have these findings.
Sharon, can you hear me?
Yeah. Tell me something.
Some precipitates on the inner surface, where on the roof of the SRF fluid pocket.
Yeah.
Or fibrin, which is also nowadays called as SHRM.
Yes.
Can point out to the chronicity of the CSR.
Yeah, so this is something like this and something like this. These are the, this is not a picture of that, but you will see a chronicity based on these lesions here.
Please explain the zero delay line in the enhanced depth OCT.
Zero delay line?
Yeah.
No, I am not aware. Is this on particular machine or something?
Even I am not sure, sir. Maybe it was.
That person can clarify more on that.
Okay. Then you showed a slide of huge PED with the minimal SRF. Could you tell the diagnosis for that?
That was a drusenoid PED.
Okay.
It was a large drusenoid PED. Let me just check. Yeah. I suppose this is what they are referring to.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So this is a PED. You can see this image. You see this is a large drusenoid PED here. You can see some reflectivity, hyperreflective here on the inner surface also. So this patient, other eye had a CNVM, and this was the better eye. And currently we are observing this because there's no definitive treatment.
And so
Sharan,
doctor,
out of curiosity, many retina consultants are also attending. Dr.
Okay.
Manoj Sasavade sir has also joined in.
Yeah.
So, would you consider doing a OCT angio at the edge of that PED?
There is no harm in doing it. I don't have easy access to that. But to tell you frankly, the other eye of the patient had a very similar PED, and the patient maintained 6/6 for almost 8 years in that eye without any change. And then the CNVM developed, and then we started treating. So she is very reluctant to do anything for this eye. But yes, you are right. We would try to do that and then try and see. But again, the question is,
Non-invasive.
yeah, it's non-invasive. You can do it. Again, the question is, even if you find it, will you treat it? I mean, that is something, whether the patient is going to accept that treatment.
We would follow up it more closely.
Yeah, the last thing I want is an RP ripped there. So, I mean, you have to take a call somewhere, and I think best is to have the patient in confidence and take a call.
then what is drill? DRIL.
Yeah, so this is, let me see, I have a photo of that.
Disorganization of the retinal inner layers, which is a sign in diabetic macular edema. So it shows poor prognosis.
Now here we are not seeing it very clearly. But yes, like Swapnesh said, when the inner retinal structures get disorganized, that is when you call it a drill. And of course, prognosis is poor when that happens.
Then the few of the students have doubt in identifying the VMA and PVD. The slide you showed, they want to have a clarification again. VMA, VMT, and PVD.
Yeah, so basically VMA is vitreomacular adhesion, which is absolutely a normal thing to happen. As the PVD starts occurring, the last area where the PVD releases is the fovea because it has the strongest attachment. So whenever that area, whatever is left, that is known as vitreomacular adhesion. Now, if it is more than 1500, it is broad. If it is less than that, it is focal. And VMT is when that same adhesion causes a disturbance in the retinal contour. Now, the contour has been disturbed because of this. That is the time you call it a traction. Here you can see there is a pull, but there is no disturbance in the contour. While here there is a disturbance in the contour. So this is known as a traction. So that is the difference between an adhesion and a traction.
Sharang,
Yeah.
many students want to know how they could learn OCT better. Is there some way that they can, any books, or would it be a practical way to learn OCT in a better way?
So there are many books which are available, and the best way is, of course, if you have a retinal surgeon close by, you can go and visit see the scans that are being done, and because you get a clinical correlation also, that really helps in learning faster as compared to just reading from books. Because if you read something from a book and then you don't go and see that patient clinically, everything you tend to forget. But on the other hand, if you see a patient clinically and you are able to see the OCT, it is very easy to correlate and stays in the mind. So that is there. I can suggest a book. Let me just see if I have it here, which I personally like. So there is this book. So there is this book, Practical Handbook of OCT, and by Bruno Lombroso. And this is a good book, and I refer to it if there is something required. So that's a good book. But there are a lot of online articles also which will describe individual conditions, and, they have been nicely described. And most of the books, what happens is the knowledge as it keeps on getting updated, the books don't get updated. For basics and all, it is fine, but the newer concepts that are developing, you might as well read online articles and probably attend more CMEs, webinars, so to speak.
And Sharan, many a times a patient will come with the OCT scan in his hand.
Yeah.
Okay. So how important is it, to see the fundus, and then also can we comment on an OCT scan which he brings like that, or should we?
So that was my golden rule, that you should always interpret an OCT from the machine and not from the scan. And I tried to put that across through various examples where I showed that a little bit eccentric scan and you're going to miss the entire lesion. And you don't want to do that. Like there was a macular hole which I showed. A scan little bit eccentric taken by somebody else somewhere is just going to, you're going to miss the lesion completely. So I don't think that's a very good idea. Always give that, tell the patient that you would yourself like to see the scan and then comment on it.
Correct.
Sharan, this may be a question in Viva. In which cases has OCT not been able to replace FFA, or in other sense, where along with OCT, FFA would be mandatory?
Yeah. So the FFA, the best part is of course the vascular, the vascular supply, which is the big point of FFA. So wherever you want to look at ischemia, the OCT is not going to help that much. Although there are certain clues which I had shown in my presentation which can guide you. But basically, when you look at a lesion, how active it is, whether there is fluid coming out or not, that only an FFA can tell us. So in cases where you have, occult CNVMs, you want to see the activity, you will need that. When you have to identify leakages, as in the case of macular edemas and in cases of NVEs, NVDs, that is where FFA is going to come into play. OCT angiography is also now, helping out to some extent in this, but I think it's still not that well established, and it will still not show you a leakage. So like Swapnesh was talking about that lesion where an OCT-A would have helped. It would have probably shown a CNVM, but again, it may be a non-leaking CNVM, in which case, whether to treat it or not is again a different story.
So do you think? Yeah, please go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
No, just to finish that question, probably treatment of a leaking CSR is one such area where FFA is irreplaceable. If you want to treat a CSR and to know a leaking point, even OCT angiography is not able to pick that up. Neither OCT can give you correct guidance. Autofluorescence can help, but FFA is still the gold standard.
Yes.
Even in diabetic retinopathy, the OCT tends to give us a much better picture of the leaking new vessels and the ischemic areas in the periphery, which is OCT angiography still cannot give good pictures in the periphery for the moment.
Then,
any other questions, Sumit?
Yeah, one last question, sir. What is polarized OCT?
Polarized OCT. I don't know if Swapnesh has any idea, sir.
No, I don't.
There are so many new OCT biomarkers which have come up. So there are so many new terminologies.
I think he's talking of a machine, something to do with the machine itself. But I have no idea about this.
About the zero delay line, which the question was asked, as far as I remember, rightly put by Sharan that it is something related to software. But a zero delay line is a reference point set by a software where the image capture is maximum or the best. So in routine OCTs, it is at the vitreoretinal interface. And he was asking about EDI, so probably I'm not sure. He has to check with because these are terminologies related to a particular software. The zero delay line would be shifted more towards the choroid or the RP choroid complex, where in enhanced depth in imaging, because at and around the zero delay line, the image acquisition is the best in a particular OCT. So in some OCTs it is fixed. In some OCTs it is there can be a manual. You can change it to a manual particular setting to find the best image at that particular depth. So that is the concept of zero delay line.
Correct. That's the basic concept of enhanced depth imaging, that you change the primary focus and shift it from the inner retina to the choroidal area. So that's how. Maybe it's that, yeah.
That answers almost everything, sir. There are
Okay.
few questions, but rest is all answered.
Okay.
So what's your final comments or anything points which we have missed out? Anything you want to?
Yeah, no, I think it was a very beautiful presentation by Sharang. He has covered virtually everything and very beautiful pictures. In fact, there were very few questions from the PGs, which means that they understood everything. That is what my impression was. At least they could make out whatever he had presented very beautifully. I think that is excellent and very comprehensive. And if PGs want to learn more, I think, a visit to a vitreoretinal surgeon's clinic once, just have a look at the pictures on the machine and see how it is being done. I think they will learn much more than just looking at the scans. So just a visit to any of our clinics, they're most welcome. And if they are close by, and they can have a look.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Excellent images. One point which may not be that important, but the PG should know about it, that if you are doing a retinal lesion scan of a 10-year-old boy, then you cannot go on the color coding.
Correct.
Because the normative data in most of the machines is beyond 18 years. So that holds true for a optic nerve OCT as well as a retinal OCT. So that has to be kept in mind, that these are the color coding or the normative data is fed only for ages above 16 or 18. Otherwise, it was superb. I am sure, Sharon, you are going to get a lot of YouTube hits.
Thank you.
Sumit, anything else?
No, sir. Just for the PGs again, we have restarted with our season 2 of the PG lectures. Now the PG lectures will not be every day, because we know most of you have started already with your duties in full fledged. So that will be alternate days, Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. It will be between 8 to 9 o'clock. So try to log in 5 minutes before with your name as a doctor. And in the next lecture will be on the Thursday. It is about FFA and ICG. Again, it is very important, both theory and the practical point of view. So I request everyone to log in 5 minutes before, and we'll meet on Thursday for the next meeting.
Lobo sir, thank you very much for sparing your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Swapnesh. Thank you, Sharang.
Thank you, Sumit.
Thank you, Sumit. Lovely.
Lobo sir, with your permission, can I end the meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, Sumit.
Thank you, sir.